All right. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Johanna Miller from VNRC, really to give us the update, just because this is such a pressing issue, and with the fires happening, with the hurricanes striking again in the coast, and now with our own governor vetoing the Global Warming Solutions Act. Tell us what's going on, Joey.
Thank you. Thank you, Maeve. Thank you everyone for joining this important conversation. Yeah, I'm Johanna Miller. I run the Energy and Climate Program at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I'm really glad to be here with you today to talk about climate, talk specifically about the Global Warming Solutions Act. Did just want to underscore that my participation in the event does not constitute an endorsement. If Governor Scott or anyone was interested in talking about climate and the solutions that we must embrace, I'd welcome that conversation, because we are in a crisis. At every moment that we delay, the costs and the consequences rise. And unfortunately too, we squander one of the greatest job creating economic development opportunities this nation has at its fingertips. So this is a really critical conversation. I look forward to giving you an update on what's happening and hearing your questions and your thoughts on what's needed. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Global Warming Solutions Act, but first, I guess I would just ask everyone to mute if you are not speaking. And secondly, I would say that leadership on climate action is essential. We have an egregious rejection of climate science and facts at the federal level, which means it is incumbent on states to step up and lead. In the past, Vermont has certainly done that, and it's been leadership at the highest levels of government, state government, that has made that possible. In the late 2000s, Governor Jim Douglas signed into Vermont onto the successful pollution reducing, money saving regional greenhouse gas initiative, a cap and invest program targeting the electric sector. Several years later, under Governor Peter Shumlin, Vermont ushered in Vermont's renewable energy standard, which required utilities not only to increasingly ramp up the amount of clean renewable electricity in their portfolios, but very innovatively, it required utilities to help customers reduce their reliance on imported fossil fuels. And it was that fossil fuel reduction requirement that not only is reducing pollution and our reliance on imported dirty fossil fuels, but it is also critically helping Vermonters save money. These are just two examples of how Vermont has innovated in the clean energy and climate arena. And again, they were both made possible by leadership in the executive branch, in the legislature, and among key players, including utilities. So despite all this, and despite strong climate goals that we've had on the books since 2006, Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions have increased 13% since 1990, when they should have been going down. We are making progress in the electric sector, again, in large part because we have required action and we've obligated our utilities to participate in our energy transition. Unfortunately, we are not making progress in our most carbon intensive sectors, the transportation and thermal sector. So the failed progress has really focused attention around the need for doing things differently, the need to be accountable to our commitments, to our goals. And that's really what has brought us to this moment of the Global Warming Solutions Act. We need a plan and an accountability framework that ensures that we get the job done when it comes to doing our part to tackle the climate crisis. And that's what the Global Warming Solution Act is. My organization has been working hard on this as a key priority. One of the key priorities of a 30-member organizational member climate coalition that we participate in, which includes low-income advocacy groups, which includes businesses and faith and public health and youth and climate justice organizations. We have centered on the Global Warming Solutions Act as a cornerstone priority because of the fact that we are not making progress. We need an accountability framework and an embedded process in state government that will ensure that we focus on the need to reduce pollution, but the opportunity in ensuring that we do that well, we do it right, we bring everyone along in this transition. So to say that I'm disappointed in Governor Scott's veto last night is an understatement. This is a crucial bill. It sets, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, but it's really important, and I'm hopeful that the legislature will override his veto. But just really quickly as a reminder, the bill sets specific greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements and deadlines for incremental progress. It establishes a climate council, very much like the one that Governor Scott put together in 2017, and I served on as one of those 21 members. Unfortunately, little has come of that, which is again why we need something like the Global Warming Solutions Act. The Global Warming Solutions Act would create that council and charge it with developing a climate action plan by 2021 with specific recommendations to cut pollution, build the climate resilience of our economies, prioritize and center rural communities and lower income and marginalized Vermonters in our solutions, and recognize and build into our climate response the role of our farms and our forests in this transition. So it's not a prescriptive bill. It does not dictate specific actions, but again, it will ensure the accountability that we have lacked to date to ensure that reductions occur in a way that serves Vermonters well. It focuses on reducing emissions across all sectors, again, promoting practices that could sequester and store carbon, focus on reducing energy burdens for rural, more low-income, marginalized communities and Vermonters who carry a higher energy burden than other Vermonters. And it really does focus and center on climate resilience. So it sets a framework for broad benefits designed to tackle the sectors that we have failed to address. And again, primarily that is the transportation and heating sector. And it sets a framework and an accountability structure that we have lacked for far too long. So this is the news of the governor's veto last night, hot off the presses. I think a short-sighted and significantly lost opportunity, but that is where we do need people to step up. I am happy to answer far more questions about the bill, but I want to turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor, who's going to talk about, and share his thoughts about the opportunity in championing climate action. I have had the opportunity to work with the Lieutenant Governor in his various roles, wearing former hats as a House representative, as a former senator, and in his role as Lieutenant Governor. I am looking forward to hearing him talk and share with us his vision for Vermont's energy future and our obligation to act on climate, the opportunity in doing so. So I'm going to give it to Maeve to center the attention on the star of the show. Thanks.
Great, and I'm just going to pass it to the Lieutenant Governor, but just first saying, if I hold your questions, if you would, so that we can take questions after we hear from David. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maeve. Thank you, Joey, for all the work you've done for years organizing. Both of you have done so much around both the climate and other environmental issues. And I originally was an environmental activist at UVM, organizing on campus around campus issues on the environment when I had no interest at that time of running for office at all. And then I saw Bernie Sanders speak, and that changed my mindset, that you could be someone who really fights for core issues, says what you believe, and you can still get elected and serve and be productive in the electoral representative world. And lo and behold, 26 or 7, 8 years later, since I first saw him speak at UVM, here I am as your Lieutenant Governor, and having served 18 years in the legislature, working on issues on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee, as well as on the Agriculture Committee, because when we think about the environment, there's huge impacts in agriculture, including relating to climate change. And now find myself with the opportunity to run for governor and really address and talk about some of the kinds of things that Joey was mentioning. And as I launched my campaign in January, and as I thought about it prior to that, the issues around our climate and our rural economy and struggling Vermonters is really the focus of where my vision is. that we need to be able to get people back to work. We need to get people able to live in an affordable way with lower energy bills. We need to support our agricultural sector with respect to carbon sequestration and regenerative agriculture. So we not only use less energy and put less carbon into the atmosphere, but also sequester carbon into our soil, build our soil to be healthier and stronger for retaining those heavy rains we're getting and holding on to those nutrients that are currently running off and polluting our rivers. These issues are all incredibly interrelated, and I'm going to get into some of the ideas that I have in a moment. But I just talked to my brother who lives in San Francisco a couple of days ago. Well, he lives there all the time. I talked to him a couple of days ago, and he was talking about the fact that to get to clean air, he would have to drive at least 150 miles east or 250 miles south or 1,500 miles north to get to air that was not polluted by the particulates from burning forest fires. That is the world we're facing right now. I don't have a brother or a sister on the Gulf Coast, but they are getting inundated with some areas over 20 inches of rain, flooding, devastation, houses and lives being destroyed, hopefully not many lives lost. We are in a record and unprecedented hurricane season with the number of named storms, record fires, record heat. Siberia was over 100 degrees. Vermont was over 100 degrees in June and even parts of July. As a farmer, I've been experiencing the dry that we had in June, and we were irrigating like crazy, but still lost thousands of dollars of crops. And throughout Vermont, we're dry. I was talking to someone in the Mad River Valley who knows neighbors who are digging wells deeper, just as we had to do a few years ago. These extreme swings are not something of the future. This is what we're living with now. We're already too late to reverse all of the impacts that climate crisis and climate change are going to have. But we must take this on and not veto the opportunities to do actions that would help our economy, that would reduce Vermonters' energy bills, and that would help our future climate, which we deeply depend on in Vermont, from the ski season to agriculture and forestry to the maple sugar industry, as well as the tourism brought in as the fall foliage starts as I look out the window. This is deeply rooted in the culture of our state. We have to take steps to move forward. We need to, now here I'm going to get into some of the plan of the Green New Deal, but we need to be putting in solar and wind in our state to put energy into the grid that is renewable. And I know that some of these things are controversial, but the challenge is, without a successful climate to live in and work in and thrive in, whatever slight discomfort people may have with solar fields or wind turbines, we're not going to have the plants and the birds and the climate that we're used to in Vermont. We need to weatherize Vermonters' homes. We need to take an investment, put money into jobs so that working Vermonters can go out there and weatherize people's homes, weatherize fixed income Vermonters' homes where they don't have the money to do the upfront cost, but immediately have savings on their energy bills, even while paying back the zero rate loans or grants. We need to build affordable and efficient homes in our rural village and town centers so that people can live and work in those centers, having enough critical mass that there could be the coffee shop and the country store. And we can repopulate our villages and our towns, not through sprawl, but through compact villages. We need to invest in broadband. Broadband is a climate solution. Look at how many people are commuting right now via the computer. Now, I would rather we have the opportunity to work and be in person with each other far more, but it's shown that we don't have to be in the workplace office 5 days a week. We could drive 2 or 3 days a week and work from home 2 or 3 days a week, immediately cutting down our auto emissions far more than the very small incremental steps that the governor's put in with energy efficient vehicles and renewable energy vehicles. We need to be far more bold. And of course, the governor's going to say, well, I'm taking these steps. They are extremely small steps relative to what we need to do to put people to work and to rebuild our climate economy. These are very obvious things to, I think, many of us, but unfortunately, it's clearly not obvious to the governor because he vetoed this bill. And so I hope folks will engage in this conversation. I hope you'll engage in this campaign over the next about 8 weeks now, 7 weeks, where we need to get folks out to vote with their ballots. And I just want to mention, speaking of campaigns, I'm in Montpelier. I'm going to be heading over to the State House shortly to run the Senate at about 1 o'clock. But I'm currently at the Vermont Democratic Party headquarters, where I was making phone calls before this Zoom call. So you see behind me the old sign for Obama-Biden. Obviously, many of us are hoping for a change in the presidency this year and are working hard to do that and to take over the Senate at the national level. But we do need to win governor's offices like this one, because again, governors are also in the position, and we're in the age of COVID where anything can happen to anybody. Governors are the folks that appoint the replacements for our US delegation to Washington. And if we are able to win the Senate or get a tie in the Senate so we can move climate legislation through Washington and across President Biden's desk, we still need to make sure that any replacement that would come from Vermont in the tragedy of, hopefully something that doesn't happen, that the governor of Vermont appoints a Democrat or at least progressive independent on climate issues to make sure that we don't lose the majority in the US Senate. That is also at stake in this governor's race. It is a small price for insurance to make sure we don't lose the Senate to get engaged in this governor's race. So I want to turn it back over to Maeve, who I think is going to make the next few comments, and we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. So we had a first question on the chat from Maggie, which I'll just repeat here. She's interested to know, Lieutenant Governor, how you would increase solar installations. We need more solar, but the developers tell me it's too expensive and cumbersome to get an application approved. So could you speak to that a little bit, please?
I can. We had a press conference a couple of weeks ago when we announced the endorsement of Vermont Conservation Voters, which is a great organization in Vermont that does engage politically and does endorsements. And they joined Sierra Club 350.org at the state level. I've now gotten the 350 national endorsement. We've also I've got Bill McKibben's endorsement, and I'm trying to think if there's others. Sunrise, Burlington, and Sunrise, Middlebury. We had that press conference, and a guy named Nils Bain from Aegis Technologies, and he's a born Vermonter who has a small solar installation company, I think 12 employees, and he talked to me about a number of the regulatory hurdles that have been put up in place in the last few years under the Scott administration, under the Public Utilities Authority, that have made it much harder to put in solar for those that can afford it and have the upfront money to do it. And I want to make sure we look at those regulatory hurdles and bring them back to reality. Some permits take as much as 700 days to get through the process. That is absurd when we're talking about reducing people's energy bills and making their lives more comfortable, as well as tackling the climate crisis. We need to put people to work in the solar energy field, and one of the ways is to deal with those regulatory hurdles that have also been put up in place relating to some of the wind as well. And we need to look at both of those so that we can install renewable energy in Vermont, reduce Vermonters' energy bills, and save people money while tackling the climate crisis.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions? I'm just scanning the videos to look for hands up. I noticed also we have a couple of renewable energy, wind and solar installers who are the wave of the future, who are on here today and with us on this call. Here we go. We have another one in the chat. Where is all the money coming for upfront installations?
I appreciate that question, and I've outlined it with respect to my climate plan for the future, as well as my jobs plan for the future of Vermont. Right now, the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters have received massive tax breaks under the Trump administration's law that came out. And for 2 or 3 years, I think we could recapture half of those tax savings that they've been sending primarily to Wall Street and say, you know what, it's time for the wealthiest folks who have benefited from 40 years of tax breaks ever since Reaganomics to invest in Vermont's economy, to put people back to work and to put them back to work for a green economy. And so that would amount to about $100 million a year for the next few years. And so if we were to put about $20 million a year into weatherization, in addition to the money the state already does, that would create hundreds of jobs. If we were to put $20 million a year into solar and renewable energy installation, for homes and businesses, again, that would put hundreds of more people back to work. Under the Scott administration, we've lost over 500 solar installation jobs and over 900 renewable energy jobs during these last few years. We can reverse that with these investments, save Vermonters money, who will then be putting money into their local economy rather than into carbon fuel bills where 80 to 90% of the dollars go out of state.
Great. We're having several questions here in the chat, which is wonderful.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. We have Traj, I don't hope I'm saying that correctly, from the Northeast Kingdom. Is there any way to get lower utility prices in these areas, like where they are in the NEK? We have one of the most expensive rates in the state and one of the most poverty-stricken areas.
Well, I think lowering rates is in some ways more difficult than investing in saving individuals money through weatherization as well as solar installation on many of those homes and properties. There are some energy experts on the call. They may be able to even articulate a little bit about how, as we have more renewable energy and stabilize our energy source, we can also reduce our bills. The other thing is, if we broaden broadband throughout our utility network, we would also have a different revenue stream for some of the utility costs. And we could reduce the dual costs of fixing wires and lines. I saw this recently, that if our utility companies were part of the broadband system, you would have one truck with a bucket going to fix both the electric lines and the fiber optic lines, saving on labor costs of there being two trucks and two different crews going out. So there's issues like that. The other thing is, as we rebuild the economy, if we grow our jobs in the remote sector, attracting people from Boston or New York, or Vermonters that start new businesses that have clients in Boston, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, we will have more people living and working on these networks, which will spread some of those fixed costs out over more people, which can also help reduce the per unit cost of energy, because the fixed cost gets spread out over more and more energy use. So those are some of the thoughts. Happy to take another question.
Yeah, and maybe, I don't know, Johanna, do you have anything that you want to say to that around utility costs? Maybe about weatherization?
No, I think that the Lieutenant Governor answered it very well. But that being said, I do think, when people think about energy, a lot of the focus is on sort of their electric bill and, those costs. I think what you raised, Maeve, with weatherization, people are paying a lot on their fuel oil bills. They're paying for their transportation costs. There's tremendous opportunity to help people save energy dollars and reduce their energy burden, not just their bill, their electric bills, but their energy burden, their energy costs, by focusing in those other arenas. So I appreciate what's behind that question. I also think there's huge opportunity, especially in more rural and lower income areas, to focus on energy equity and helping people reduce their energy costs more broadly. And I also think that that's what the Global Warming Solutions Act would help do, because it prioritizes more vulnerable, lower income, or marginalized communities, and ensuring that they are part of this transition.
Exactly. I wonder if our other guest, Linda, might be a good opportunity to pipe in about what your great work over in the Upper Valley around these issues too.
Well, I can just say that I think overall on utility costs, utility issues are extremely complex, so I'm not going to try to get into that. What I can speak to is, as a local energy committee activist, and I've been involved with our town energy committee for about 12 years now, and it's very good work. It's satisfying to be able to convince folks in town to go solar or to weatherize. I can see after years of doing this that it's totally balanced, or the foundation for that kind of stuff relates to state level policies in terms of incentives available to people from Efficiency Vermont, or in the sense of for solar, there's federal tax credits. So policies make a huge difference in terms of the individual decisions that homeowners make about their energy choices. I think, so it's just, I take it back again that it's got to be state leadership. Vermont has done a wonderful job of setting goals, and now it's way past time where we've got to be taking action.
Great, thanks, Linda. We had a question kind of going in a different direction around transitioning to regenerative agriculture, which you mentioned in the beginning, David. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that to answer Lori's question.
Sure. Thank you, Lori and Maeve, for that question. As a farmer, I'm more aware than many about the potential of what agriculture can do to sequester carbon and to help us with the climate crisis. And as someone who grows cover crops, we seeded some last week. We're going to seed some more next week. We've got cover crops everywhere from just germinating to about a foot high on the farm right now. We know that carbon sequestration through agriculture is probably the best opportunity to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. There's technologies and science and energy that can be used to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. But again, you're using energy to do that, whereas our plants naturally do that extremely well. And so when you look at carbon release in our atmosphere in the spring, when farms till up their soils around the globe, that's when you see the most carbon going into the atmosphere on a global scale. And if we did more regenerative agriculture with more animal rotational grazing, we would reduce that release in the spring, and through that plant material growing and getting incorporated into the soil, we would be pulling carbon into the soil, which would also help with what I think is one of the other questions on the call around adaptation. And one of the things that we're seeing is these heavier downpour rains that are often running off the surface, bringing surface pollutants to our lakes and rivers and streams, as well as carving out, edges of roads, destroying culverts and so forth. We didn't used to have these kinds of rains under our more moderated climate. But if we're going to have these heavy rains, if you sequester carbon in the soil, it gets more sponge-like. It can hold more of that water and release it more slowly, so you don't get the extreme river flooding and field runoff that you do with soils that have been worked more and are depleted of their carbon. So carbon sequestration really is a multifaceted way to both help our farms with economic viability, as well as pulling carbon out of the air and reducing potential costly damage to our infrastructure, and possibly also taking out lives by, we can reduce that with a regenerative agriculture model.
So many benefits to that. Wonderful. The next question is a little bit more on Global Warming Solutions Act. So I wonder, Johanna, if you'd be willing to take this one. It's from Meredith Roberts. And she writes here in the chat, I was proud that my representative voted for the global bill. She mentioned a common concern stated by members who requested to explain their vote was that the legislature was ceding its authority to the Vermont Climate Council that would be created, I believe, with this. How do you suggest we reassure those concerns?
Well, I would simply say, remind folks that, as you know, we have a citizen-led legislature. They are a part-time legislature who, setting a policy framework and clear directive, and then, giving the room for the executive branch and our state agencies to run under that directive is what we do all of the time. So no, the legislature is not ceding its authority. In fact, the legislature will retain its traditional role as law and policy maker. they're still going to have to pass legislation where recommendations involve an expansion of authority or any new taxes or fees or big initiatives will require the partnership of the legislature to take effect. And there's an ongoing sort of communications process embedded in the bill for the legislature to be notified and to have updates, and they will be participating in the rulemaking progress. So, and they can always pass a law to invalidate a rule. So I would just say that is not accurate. And I would ask the Lieutenant Governor in his many years as a House, Senate, and Lieutenant Governor, just to weigh in on your perspective on that as well.
Oh, you're muted, David.
I see that. Sorry about that. As someone who has served in the House and the Senate, now as Lieutenant Governor, I watch these amazing people who serve folks all across the state in 4 months or 5 months, dig as deep as they can into many of these issues. And year round, they're learning as well and working in their communities and attending various meetings and seminars, sometimes across the country, obviously not right now. But very few legislators are experts in every field, right? Each one has their life experience, their professional expertise. And one of the things that a council like this could do is really, as we're looking at the climate crisis, and we need to be looking at it from a jobs perspective, from a transportation perspective, from a housing perspective, from a communications and telecommunications perspective, even education. We need to have a knowledgeable group of people together who can really dig into these issues year round, and then have the legislature help to review them and to, as we said earlier, authorize them and so forth, to then implement the policies necessary, and to include the governor and the governor's staff in these discussions so that we can work collaboratively across all branches of government. But it is a red herring to say they could just suddenly change policy without the legislature or the governor. There's a really interesting conversation going on where the governor has said, well, this takes too much authority away from the governor. And the legislative Republicans are saying, this gives too much authority to the governor and his people. So, or at this point, his people, it may be a her someday. And so it's just fascinating to see, even within the Republican world, they're using different talking points that conflict with each other about the problems of this bill, because those problems don't exist. And the governor's also put out that there's the damage of lawsuits. Well, there's no ability for lawsuits to get damages and those extreme high cost type lawsuits. That's written into the bill, so that won't happen. It's just simply holding politicians who say they want to do something, like our governor did about the Paris Accord, and yet has done very little to really tackle the climate crisis the way he said he would, and to hold the elected officials accountable for the future that we all need to have, which is a livable planet with the natural resource base that we need. So, no, I don't think this puts off responsibility or authority anywhere that is being talked about. It all does come back to the legislature and the governor to implement the policies, but it does create maybe a less political atmosphere between the rhetoric and action.
Great, and I'd love to turn it over to Linda at this point, just to say a little bit about why this election is so important and what people can do to get more involved.
Thank you, Maeve. I'm happy to do that. And I want to repeat again a little bit of my background, which is that I've been working on my energy committee for about 12 years. And we'd been, for the most part, focused on our town activities. And it began to be very apparent to me that, as I said before, that it's other higher level policies that influence what we're able to do on the individual level. And so we've got to have policies. And so many of the people on the phone today or on the Zoom meeting today may have heard from me via email, because I've been very active over the last 9 months trying to get and other fellow Energy Committee members to be talking to their state reps and stuff. And our focus, as Joey mentioned, the focus of this legislative session for climate action has ended up being the Global Warming Solution Act. And so we are at the down to the very last wire, and we have veto override vote coming in the House tomorrow. I don't know when the Senate vote is scheduled, but it's so crucial to get something like this passed, and it's so disappointing to be at the point where we don't have a cooperative partner in the governor's office. And so I can't just express how important I feel that at a state level this election is. I think all of us are recognizing how important the election in November is at a national level, but I want to emphasize that it's just as important at the state level. And so I just want to boost everybody. I will acknowledge I'm a board member of Vermont Conservation Voters, and Vermont Conservation Voters has endorsed David, but I'm speaking here today, as you can tell, as a local energy activist, and I just feel like it's so crucial to be talking to people, let people know that the climate crisis that we have is just as important as the pandemic crisis that we've been dealing with over the last 6 months. And this is something that it's like, if we don't take action now, we're going to get stuck, and we won't be able to deal with the many other crises that are coming our way. I'll stop there. I'm going to get apocalyptic if I go on.
Great. Thank you, Linda. So we've had a ton of questions here, and I just want to try to get to them all. There was a question about climate adaptation and works in progress for culverts and protecting people from fires and floods and all of the rest. I don't know, maybe if Joey, you had a quick few words to say that. I might actually bump that to 12:50 and just hold that if you don't mind, Barbara, who asked that question. There was also the question about what about these concerns about suing alongside with this Global Warming Solutions Act. And so maybe Joey, you could respond to that too. David's going to have to run here in about 10 minutes. So I want to prioritize the questions for him while we've got him. I also saw that somebody asked about disposal of solar panels, and I wonder, we have some, again, some solar panel installers on the call today, and I wonder if they'd be willing to just write a little something in the chat to respond to that question that came in from Carol. And then I would love to hear from Beth Sachs. Had some really wonderful commentary here in the chat, and I know not everyone is maybe monitoring the chat. So I wonder, Kelt, if you could unmute Beth, and Beth, if you'd be willing to speak to those a little bit. You have such knowledge base in this area as well.
Sure. Do you want me to talk now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. Well, from the chat, you can tell I have been working in this field for about 50 years, and I don't think we have time to convince people one at a time to make good energy decisions, and that it's going to have to be something that's mandated at the policy level. That's why we have government policy. And I think that we can do it in a way that doesn't harm the people who can afford it the least, if we think it out. That's all.
Okay.
For now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks,
You.
Beth. David, do you maybe want to respond to that or add to that?
I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, we worked in the legislature for many years. Way back when I was first in the legislature, we put in the Residential Building and Energy Standards Law. I worked with Mary Sullivan and others on the Natural Resources Committee to do that, so that if you weren't building your own home, but there were any commercial folks building homes, there would be some standards. Now those standards are out of date. They're probably almost 20 plus years old now. And we have to do it some through those mandates and standards, but also one of the biggest hurdles for most people in the convincing process is about dollars and cents. And many people don't have the money to do it up front, which is why in my Green New Deal plan, we would provide the money through, yes, reallocation of the Trump tax cuts that go to the wealthiest to make sure working people or those who might be right on the edge of being able to afford these kinds of projects could install them. You know, if you could go to someone and say, hey, do you know that you could lower your energy bill by, you know, X dollars a month? And that's a bigger number than paying back the zero interest loan over the next 12 or 20 years. So literally, we will do this project and you will immediately have $5 or $20 lower bills every month for money in your pocket to put food on your table. Far more folks are going to say yes than if they say, well, I've got to take out a loan. And even if it's a subsidized loan at 2 or 3%, it might save me money, it might not. If we can change that financial equation by putting money into that opportunity for working people, I would hope that convincing would be a lot easier to do. But we do have to look at all sorts of energy policy in this state and look at it through the lens of the climate crisis, and whether it's mandating something or doing something through the public authority, that is where we need to look at the policies that are putting roadblocks in the way and get them out of the way.
Great, thanks. And that maybe segues nicely to this question from Robin about potentially having a budget line for climate devastation costs here in the chat. Would you want to respond to that, David?
Well, sure. There's no doubt. I think we should publicize what these costs are. The budget itself is usually a planning document where you're budgeting forward. But I think as a state, we should be releasing annual expenditures, especially unexpected expenditures, as to the cost of doing nothing. I've seen many social media conversations where someone says, we need to do this. And someone else says, but the cost is too high. And someone else says, but the cost of doing nothing is even higher. When you look back at Tropical Storm Irene and the huge costs from that massive storm, but also when you look at these local isolated flooding events, we have these, I call them popcorn thunderstorms, where one, half a county of our state just gets devastated by a massive downpour. And everybody else says, well, what happened today? That's a cost to the state transportation, emergency dollars, and so forth. And a cost to the state is a cost to every Vermonter, because that's our tax dollars that are no longer available for childcare or economic development or food support programs for folks that are living and working on the edge because the governor vetoed the minimum wage. And this year alone, people would have $1,000 or even $2,000 more dollars in their pocket as minimum wage workers if the governor hadn't vetoed that bill. So when we don't have the resources to feed people or to support people who are struggling, because we have to put more money into climate devastation mitigation, that should be announced annually, if not more so, to say, because we're not tackling the climate crisis, money is being spent in these ways that could be spent helping Vermonters.
Great, and I know you have to run here pretty soon, David, but could you just say a little bit about, it's a great segue into why we need you for governor and what we need to make this campaign successful.
Well, thank you, Maeve, and I do appreciate it. Normally this time of year as Lieutenant Governor, I would not be headed to the State House to preside over the Senate. But of course, we're talking about the Global Warming Solutions Act because it would have been acted on this spring and wasn't because of COVID-19. We're all living under this very bizarre new world. And it's our job in government to handle these kinds of crises well. And I appreciate the work that's been done by the administration. I particularly appreciate the work and leadership of Dr. Levine, who I would continue on, if he'd be willing, as our Commissioner of Health through the COVID pandemic. But really, when we look at the overall vision for this state and we look at the management for the last 4 years, there has not been the vision when it comes to the climate crisis and mitigation and job opportunities and saving people money. When we look at the last 4 years and the discussion around affordability, and again, struggling Vermonters have a hard time buying recycled toilet paper or healthier food because it costs more, even though that's also what they want to do. So we need to look at that affordability issue. And the governor's vetoed the minimum wage. He's vetoed paid family and medical leave. He's vetoed the bill that would have held toxic polluters accountable when they poison people's groundwater. I mean, this is not a visionary governor, and we need to both work in the present, handle the crisis of the present, and work towards the future. And as a farmer, that's what I do every day. On my farm, we are dealing with today's crops and today's planting and today's weeding and irrigation. And we're planning for the future to build our soil, to make the soil healthier for the future so that the next year's crops are that much more healthy and able to be resilient to the pests or the extreme weather that comes. We have been using our capital, and we need to build our capital, and we need to address our challenges while building for the future. And I would love everyone's support. I would love folks to visit my website, zuckermanforvermont.com, to get involved, put up lawn signs, write letters to the editor, put up front porch forum posts, make phone calls, talk with your neighbors, whoever it is you do see when you're out for your walks, and point out that, yes, it's our job to handle the current crisis well. It's also our job to plan to mitigate the future crises. And that's where there's a big difference. I would do things very similar to Governor Scott with respect to COVID. Listen to the science, listen to the medical experts, make sure to be cautious, work with our great citizenry who deserve a lot of credit for taking care of our neighbors with mutual aid groups and so forth. But we have to also plan for the future. We got to rub our belly and tap our head at the same time. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you everyone for coming into this conversation. Send ideas and thoughts and questions and concerns through my campaign. We will get back to you. And thank you, Joey and Linda, for being on this call as well, for answering some of these questions, and everybody else who attended with the incredible knowledge you have. Beth, you put a lot into the chats. I appreciate that. I do have to run. Thank you so much.
David has to run, but we can stay here for a few more minutes. There were some additional questions. There were some great responses. We had actually, it sounded like at least 3 solar installers on the call today, which was wonderful, talking about how these panels can last a really long time, decades, and also be recycled as well. So scroll through the chat if you haven't already, because there are great responses in there. I did want to get back to the question of climate adaptation, if Barbara is still here, and we could chat about that a little bit. Johanna, would you be willing to talk about climate adaptation and what Vermont's been doing and what we could do more of?
Vermont's been doing not nearly enough. I mean, I think we all know that we live in an amazingly beautiful state, rich in natural resources, abundant farms and forests, and yet our communities, including even last year, and if folks remember the insane Halloween storm, the deluge of rain that really really sort of crashed Halloween and cost, to David's earlier point, Vermont taxpayers well over $5 million. Like, our infrastructure could not handle that kind of intense rain event. And so we need to become more resilient. We need to adapt. We need to ensure that we are, girding our infrastructure, especially in rural and in urban communities, to withstand and survive those kinds of events. So we have a lot more to do, and I'm just going to put in one more plug for the Global Warming Solutions Act as a broad-based framework to reduce climate pollution, but also to focus needed attention on adaptation and resilience in this transition. So we got a lot more to do. We have expertise in the state of Vermont to do that, and we're not yet doing it well.
Great, Joey. Thank you. Linda, did you have anything you wanted to say either to climate adaptation, or there was also some comments about, senior issues too, which I'm sure you've grappled with over in your area and your work on the committee work?
No, I don't have a great deal that I can add on that. I wonder if you would like, I saw as I just skimmed through the chat questions, that there were some further questions about the potential suits under the Global Warming Solution Act. And I have some information that my rep, Tim Brigland, who was the committee chair that developed this, and I'd like to share that information from him. There were several points that he summarized for me that he had provided to many other legislators with that question. So let me just go that. He says he wrote to me that the cause of action in the bill is narrow and focused precisely so that court, the state, and the plaintiff are clear on accountability. So because there is a cause of action in the bill, the state is both accountable for accomplishing the greenhouse gas reduction requirements, and prospective plaintiffs are clear on precisely on what grounds the state can be held accountable. There are two narrow causes of action, and one is that the state, the Agency of Natural Resources, fails to conduct rulemaking that's both consistent with the climate action plan and meet the deadlines for adoption. And the second is that rules adopted by ANR are a substantial cause of failure in the event that the state fails to meet the reduction requirements. And so in no case are financial damages awarded to a plaintiff. The only recourse, if the court finds in favor of a plaintiff, is to require the state, and that's mostly Agency of Natural Resources, to meet the deadlines, i.e. hurry up, and or to make tougher rules. So I just wanted to share that because I feel like the discussion that relates to concern about suits, etc., is truly misplaced. And I don't want people to go away with any misunderstanding about that.
Thanks, Linda. And I think Joanna can say a little bit more about what's next for GWSA.
Yeah, and just to follow up, one last thing about to follow on what Linda just noted about the cause of action and the potential lawsuit. First of all, we will never need to bring a lawsuit if we are actually serious about what we say and we do what we need to do. So, I mean, the lawsuit is the last resort, it's the hammer, and importantly, the only remedy the lawsuit would create is requirement for this, the state, the obligated party, which is the Agency of Natural Resources, to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're actually going to meet our goals. So there is no financial remedy or financial benefit. So it's very narrow, it's very focused. Ideally, we never get there because we are serious about what we say we need to do, and we see the opportunity in it. And just because it's super timely, yes, the governor late yesterday afternoon, early evening, vetoed the Global Warming Solutions Act. The legislature is still in session. They are going to be done and close the session by the end of next week. The House is going to convene tomorrow and take up the veto override on this bill. If you have House members, I really encourage you to look at how they voted. I'll put here in the chat or a summary of who voted how on this bill. Thank them for their vote if they did support it in the past. Urge them, beseech them to not squander another moment as our nation is on fire in the West, to do what we know we need to do. So ask them to support the veto override tomorrow. If the House does that, the Senate would likely act on it early next week. So we need both a House and a Senate successful veto override. Both of those bodies had a veto-proof majority, but it is going to be a squeaker. The pressure from the administration and the governor to not override will be strong. We need every Vermonter to support their House and Senate senators in doing what we need to do and not kicking the can down the road. It's too costly, it's too consequential. We have no more time. Let's do this. So I will put that in the chat right here. And thank you in advance for all you can do and all you've been doing.
Awesome. Ending with action. I love it. And I would say on the campaign side, you know, if we had David as governor, we would not have to be doing these machinations of sending it back for an override vote. So urge you all also, as well as doing the immediate action that Johanna is talking about of getting in touch with your local representatives, to also really consider supporting David even more than you have already. So if that means another donation or another volunteer shift, or chatting with us personally about how you can, you know, write a letter to the editor to talk about why this issue is so central to to literally our survival going forward, and why we need a governor like David in charge, both for the devastation and the challenges that we're going to have with floods and hopefully not fires, but I just saw an article about New Hampshire wildfire risk as well. We need David for our next governor immediately, because this situation is so dire. And so with that, I think we can wrap up. If you, Kelt, if you wanted to unmute everyone, just so we could all kind of say hello and goodbye at the same time. And thank you everyone for participating in this really wonderful and lively discussion and talk today.
Thank you.
Thank you.